Today we are going to be going back in time a little bit for another book to movie comparison. The subject of today's video is For Whom the Bell Tolls by Ernest Hemingway, a story set during the Spanish Civil War following a guerrilla unit tasked with blowing up an enemy bridge. Now, this video has been exciting to make because Ernest Hemingway is one of my favorite authors, and the movie based on this book was made in the early 1940s, which is one of my favorite time periods for movies. So I got a lot of enjoyment out of these two adaptations, and I will definitely be doing more of these books to movie comparisons with more Ernest Hemingway books in the future. The order of this video is, first, I will give an overview of the book. Second, I will give an overview of the movie. Then I will go over the plot of both, going over the changes they made from the book to the movie, comparing the two versions, seeing how well the book adapts into movie form. Alright, let's get this started. The book, For Whom the Bell Tolls by Ernest Hemingway, is among the most popular works for Hemingway, right up there with The Old Man and the Sea and Farewell to Arms. The book was published in 1940 after the Spanish Civil War ended, but the events of the book take place in 1937, which would have been in the earlier stages of the Spanish Civil War. Now, this war was something that Hemingway was very passionate about. He was in Spain for a good portion of the war, working with the North American Newspaper Alliance to cover the war. As shown in the messaging of the novel, Hemingway himself was very anti-fascist, and in the copy of the book I own, there's a transcript of a speech he gave in 1937 to the American Writers' Congress at Carnegie Hall, titled "Fascism is a Lie," which was a very well done speech, which I'm sure you can find on Google if you're interested in reading it. It was only about 3 pages long. There's also a few quotes that the main character has when he says he is not a communist, but rather an anti-fascist, and he has concerns if he can return to America now that he has associated himself with the Soviets, and I assume that may have been at least a little bit of self-inserted beliefs. Other than his anti-fascist speeches, he was hardly politically outward with his beliefs. Hemingway loved the country of Spain. He once stated that it was the country I loved more than any other except my own, and he wrote plenty of other stories there, most popular being The Sun Also Rises. But now with the book itself, it is a longer book to read. My copy was nearing 500 pages, which of course that can vary from book to book. Now the writing style is what makes this book as memorable as it is. The book follows 4 days and 3 nights, which isn't a long time, and as I just mentioned, it's a lengthy book, so the details that are provided flesh out the story and the characters perfectly. It also isn't a difficult book to get through because of the amount of dialogue in it. A majority of the book is from the perspective of Robert Jordan, who is the main character, but there are a few times it switches perspectives, and it's usually just a couple of pages at a time. There are also a decent amount of flashbacks to provide background for a lot of the characters. My favorite part of the writing style was how Hemingway incorporates Spanish into the story. Most of the time, the characters are talking in Spanish in the story, but the text is English so we can read it. But every couple of lines he would put in an actual Spanish word and then have the translation right after. But after a while he wouldn't put the translations, so I was like, the whole phrase was in Spanish and I understood it without a translation because I just remembered it from previously in the story. Hemingway also censored out a lot of swear words in the story, but he did it in an interesting way that was very unique. He would just write obscenity instead of the swear word, so when a character gets mad you just see obscenity a couple of times in the same sentence. Very interesting way to write. If you do choose to read this book, it would be best to spend about 5 minutes researching the Spanish Civil War beforehand, because he kind of assumes you know the basics before you start reading. The only complaint I have for the book is that 3 of the characters have a name that starts with A: Anselmo, Augustin, and Andres, and for me, who is new to traditional Spanish names, it was difficult to keep track of who was who, especially Augustin and Andres. Now for the overview of the movie. For Whom the Bell Tolls was released in July 1943. The director of the movie was Sam Wood, most popular for directing some 1930s movies like A Day in the Opera and Goodbye, Mr. Chips. The movie was made with an estimated $3 million budget, but made over $6 million at the box office, and was second at the 1943 domestic box office, only to This Is the Army, a wartime musical. So it was a success there, but today it's kind of a forgotten about movie. I didn't even know there was a movie for this book till I read about it in my copy of the novel. The reviews of the movie are decent, but it seems like the complaints of the movie since the day it came out to today are that the movie is too long. And the film is almost 3 hours long when you include the intermission, and there are definitely some slow parts, but I'll get into that later. Hemingway sold the book rights to Paramount for $100,000, and he selected Paramount to get Gary Cooper to play the role of his main character. Gary Cooper was, of course, a big name to have in the movie, known for being an few westerns and having the war movie credentials with Alvin York, so he fit the part well. He also sent a signed copy of the book to Ingrid Bergman and left a note in it.
I didn't know him and received this great surprise and opened the book, and inside he had written, "You are the Maria in this book."
Really?
Yes.
However, Paramount had already cast a different actress for Maria, but Hemingway assured Bergman that she would get the part, and sure enough.
And 3 weeks after, I was called up, and they said, "We've changed our plans. We're taking off the actress who is playing it now, and are you willing to cut your hair?" And I said, "I'm willing to cut my head, if I can get that part."
Outside of that, I'm not sure how much influence Hemingway had on the movie. I saw an article where he complained about some wardrobe choices and other smaller changes, as well as an odd scene that opens the movie, so maybe he only got the cast members he wanted and then had to step aside after that. The movie took 24 weeks to shoot the film, July through October 1942. The first 12 weeks were shot at Sonora Pass in the Sierra Nevada mountains. The last 12 weeks were shot at the Paramount studio in California. The scenery in the movie is beautiful. However, there were a few times when you could definitely tell they were on set and were just looking at a screen and not actually at the scene. But when they were in the Sierra Nevada, you could definitely tell. Also, the movie score was very well done. I'm pretty sure there was not a moment in the movie where there wasn't music or a soundtrack in the background, so it filled the space very well. Alright, onto the third section of the video, where we'll go over the plot of the story, comparing the book to the movie. Now, as always with books, there is no visuals, so you have your own idea in your head of what people look and act like while you read the story. With an author like Hemingway, that is doubled due to the amount of detail and story he gives each character, and with almost every character in the movie, they just about nailed every single one of my mental images of the characters. Also, the movie sticks extremely close to the plot. It just misses the deeper details of the book, which is pretty usual for movies, because if they kept all that in, the movie would be about 10 hours long. But interestingly enough, one of the biggest changes is the first scene of the movie. In the movie, it starts off with our main character, Robert Jordan, and another character, Kashkin, blowing up a train, which is setting up Robert's role in the war because he is a dynamiter. So the train blows up, then the nationalists flow out of the destroyed train and trace them down and manage to shoot Kashkin. And then Kashkin asks Robert to end his own life so he is not taken prisoner. This is the scene I mentioned earlier that Hemingway disapproved of because they were blowing up a train with no army, and when Kashkin dies he says adios instead of salud, which would have been improper for the time.
Adios, Kashkin.
Adios, Roberto.
But the scene is a very random, cold-hearted scene to open with. Robert Jordan would do cold-hearted actions, but not enough for it to be the opening scene of the movie. On top of this, Robert Jordan was wearing a trench coat, fedora with a pistol, and it was an interesting silhouette style of filming that made it look like more of a noir film with Humphrey Bogart. I don't know, it was just an odd way to start the film. In the book, this particular scene only takes place in dialogue in the span of a couple of different conversations. Kashkin had helped the guerrilla group blow up the train that Maria was on, and it was a big deal when it was revealed that Robert Jordan was the one that killed Kashkin, because the group didn't like that Kashkin was killed by the hand of their new ally. But in the movie, I don't believe that the guerrilla group even mentions Kashkin. After that scene, things start to get extremely close to the book. Robert gets his orders from General Goltz that there is going to be an offensive by the Republic, and they need a bridge blown in 3 days, which will be the morning of when the offensive starts. It is here where we meet Anselmo, who escorts Robert to Pablo's guerrilla unit. Anselmo is played by Vladimir Sokolov, and he is known as the Old Man. He gives a very passionate performance and nails his scene, especially at the end where he has to kill an enemy soldier despite not wanting to harm anyone. The next character we come across is Pablo, who is the presumed leader of the guerrilla force. Pablo is played by Akim Tamiroff, who won Best Supporting Actor for his portrayal in this film. Pablo was, in my opinion, the most interesting character. Pablo was an alcoholic who was at one point a fierce fighter fighter, but since the train heist with Kashkin, he had turned into a coward whose only goal was to survive the war. Now, Pablo's woman is named Pilar, and she was who the entire guerrilla force now followed in the face of Pablo's cowardliness. Pilar is played by Katina Paxinou and is the standout of the movie by far. She won Best Actress in a Supporting Role that year, and for a good reason. She perfectly portrays the rough and tough leader, but is yet still warm-hearted to characters like Maria. The next character is Raphael, who is the gypsy, played by Mikhail Rasumny. Throughout the entire story, he is commonly referred to as the gypsy by the rest of the group due to him being pretty useless at most points in the story. Also a part of this group is the other lead character, Maria, as I mentioned earlier, played by Ingrid Bergman. Maria was rescued from the Nationalists during the train heist. And just to avoid confusion, there are two different train heists. The heist that Kashkin did with the guerrilla unit that saved Maria and then gave Pablo and the others PTSD. And then the train heist with Robert and Kashkin at the beginning of the movie where Robert has to kill Kashkin. Anyway, Maria was the daughter of a prominent Republican, and she was forced to watch her parents murdered by the Nationalists, and it was then when she got her head shaved and was put into prison after being abused, which explains why her hair is still short in the movie. She has an interesting personality in the movie because she is deeply traumatized from those past events, and she believes that no one will be capable of loving her again, but when Robert Jordan is interested in her, she gets almost too excited and falls madly in love with him in just a few days. Together, they make plans to get married, and right after the mission, Robert plans to take her back across enemy lines with him to start their new life together. There are also other members of the squad like Fernando, Andres, Primitivo, and Augustin, but they play less prominent roles in the main story. They will obviously have more personality in the books just because of time. Pilar then tells the story of taking her hometown from the Nationalists via a flashback. The scene shows Pablo before he was a coward, taking out the city guards, and then it shows the brutal executions on everyone in the town that was sympathetic toward the wrong side. This scene showed how Hemingway did not shy away from showing the atrocities committed by both sides during the war. And in the movie, it's done in a memorable way where Pilar narrates the flashback, so the only voice you hear is hers, so she's having a conversation with herself in a way. It's a very well done scene.
Why is it done this way, they asked Pablo. To save bullets, he said, and to make all of you share in the killing.
So next in the storyline, Robert and a few others go to the adjacent camp of El Sordo because they will need more horses for the retreat after the bridge blows up.
Easier blow the bridge tonight.
I'd be shot for it.
Do it in daylight and we may all be shot for it.
Not if we have horses.
El Sordo agrees to get more horses and plans to get some that night. The problem is, it starts to snow, despite it being May. Robert Jordan wakes up to an enemy soldier and is forced to shoot him. El Sordo's horses had left tracks in the snow, and now a large unit of Nationalists are chasing him down. And this welcomes the movie and book's first major action scene. And the book, it is told in a really cool way, where it tells it all from Robert Jordan's perspective while the fighting is happening a long way off. You just get a description of it from the distance. And there's a lot of tension with the group of how they should help out, but the answer is that it's too late and there are too many of the enemy. Then it goes back and retells the story from El Sordo's perspective. The movie just does both at the same time, going back and forth, and I was extremely impressed with the level of action in this 1940s movie. Everything from the scenery to the acting to the production scale was really well done. When the soldiers' faces went from laughing to fear when they heard the plans was executed perfectly. Just a well done scene. From here, Pablo once again loses hope that they can blow up the bridge without the extra help. So he steals the exploder and burns it in the movie, or throws it down a ravine in the book. Then he runs off. After this, Robert is obviously stressed about the mission now. But then in the morning, Pablo had another change of heart where he said he got lonely after leaving the group and he rounded up a couple of reinforcements and was ready to help blow up the bridge. However, there were still not enough horses for the retreat, which Pablo told Robert not to worry about. While all of this is happening, there's a side plot where Robert found out that the plans of the Republican offensive had been leaked by the enemy and the enemy would be ready for a counterattack. So Robert sent Andres off to tell the general on the other side of the lines to stop the attack. This is where another big change happens. In the movie, Andres just doesn't make it in time due to all the soldiers that are slow to pass him along. However, in the book, there's a Republican politician character that stops them and arrests them because he believes they are working with a fascist. And there's an extended dialogue of one of the soldiers telling the politician off for being useless and being the reason they will lose the war. Needless to say, the message does not get to the general in time, but the scene of the soldier telling off the politician is definitely missed in the movie. So now we have reached the finale with the blowing of the bridge. The fight here is one part I think the movie does a little better at. The reason is, in the book it's a little hard to follow where everyone is at because they split into a couple of different groups, and it's difficult to visualize how all of the settings connect with each other. But in the movie, you can tell which side of the bridge they are on and where the road travels. And once again, for an early 1940s movie, the action is insanely good. The only part I didn't like was how there's a random side plot where the gypsy wanted to blow up a tank. It was just pretty cheesy and very predictable how it would play out. Another mini detail I liked better in the book was how the bridge blew up. Anselmo was holding the string to pull to blow up the bridge, but he wanted to wait till Robert was safe to blow it. Then in the book, he pulls it when Robert is behind cover and Anselmo dies in the blast. In the movie, I assume they wanted Gary Cooper to be the hero that blew up the bridge, so Anselmo refuses to pull the string, so Robert runs over and pulls it and Anselmo dies. But it didn't give Anselmo his heroic moment, and it kind of looks like Robert just killed Anselmo because he didn't let him get to cover. Then the bridge is blown and the retreat starts. And here is where the saddest scene in the story happens, where Pablo shoots his own men to free up the horses for the retreat. It's left ambiguous in the books, but it's like a 90% chance he shot his own men. And what makes it even worse is that enough people died already, where they already had enough horses for the retreat without Pablo's murderous actions. Pablo, of course, did not know that. There's also a very powerful scene where Maria prays for Robert to be safe. And this is a powerful scene because at this time, the Republicans had pretty much banned religion. So the scene shows that in times of true crisis, crying out to a higher power will triumph over faith in one's state or political beliefs. During the retreat, they must cross where the tanks are firing, and everyone makes it across except Robert, who got hit fatally in the leg. This is where the book is leagues better than the movie. In the book, he gets Pablo first and tells him that he will need to get Maria to safety after they have a quick talk. This shows that though Robert hated Pablo, he trusted him to make a difficult action to force Maria away from him and get her to safety. Then he talks to Maria and tells her that they won't be going to Madrid together and says his final goodbye. However, in the movie, Ingrid is putting her heart and soul into the performance of this final goodbye, but Gary Cooper sounds like he is reading his lines for the very first time.
You go now, Maria.
No, I stay with you, Roberto.
No, Maria. What I do now, I do alone. I couldn't do it if you were here. If you go, then I go too. Don't you see how?
This was the only time his acting bothered me, and it went downhill so fast. Like, he just got his leg blown up, and he is still saying everything in the most monotone voice ever. Then Maria leaves, and in the book, there is a short interaction where Augustin asks Robert if he would like to be shot, but Robert decides to try and do one last heroic act. And then it goes into Robert's final thoughts about Maria, his family, the war. And in the book, it is a seamless transition because it is all from his perspective. But in the movie, it is the first time it goes into a narrated type inner thought scene with Robert.
Don't pass out, Jordan.
So it was interesting, but it just felt really out of place. But the film makes up for it with a great final scene with Robert blasting the machine gun one final time, followed by the bell tolling. And there is the end of both the book and the film. As I mentioned earlier, the biggest complaint of this movie is the length of it, and that is because they went with a book-accurate film instead of a 90-minute popcorn film. And if you haven't read the book, I can see how you might get a little bored on a lot of the dialogue scenes, especially with Robert and Maria at certain points. But I would say that For Whom the Bell Tolls is one of my favorite books of all time, and would highly recommend the movie as well. 5 out of 5 on the book and 4 out of 5 on the movie. Thanks for sticking around with a long video. I'll have to start reading another book so I can do another one of these videos. Thanks for watching.